Helena to be a moderator for our group. So I thought I'd give you a little introduction about myself. I am 57 years old, and I originally am from Illinois. I grew up there in a children's home, and I actually moved to San Antonio, Texas about 36 years ago when I joined the Army. I was actually tired of starving, and I wanted to finish my college education, and it just offered me an opportunity to do that. So I got down to San Antonio and was working my Army job down there at Fort Sam, and I kind of recommitted my life to Jesus at that point. I was a little bit flighty because of a lot of abuse I had experienced as a child, and I was just kind of carrying that in. And so I recommitted myself to Christ at a big church in San Antonio, a very patriarchal church, which I didn't understand that at the time. I met my husband there, my husband Russell, and we married in 1986. And looking back on it, I see that it was actually a fairly fast romance. That seems to be one of the red flags. We met on January 1 of 1986, and we were married by August, but we were actually going to get married a little sooner than that. Another red flag is being separated, isolated from friends and family. Well, for various reasons, I wasn't very close to my family at all, my adoptive family in Illinois. And obviously, I didn't have any friends because they were all in Illinois. And so I'm in Texas with no family, no friends. So there's no need for him to isolate me. Um, and that was a piece of the puzzle that I didn't really understand until more recently. So Rusty seemed like everything that I wasn't. He was very together. Uh, his clothing and upkeep were very together. And he was a very directed person, focused person. And I liked that because I was much more kind of the life of the party. And not that I couldn't be serious, but that was just kind of my personality. And so we got married, and we had trouble right away. I had brought some intimacy issues into our marriage that I wasn't really aware of because I really didn't have another relationship before him. I had one short-term one, but anyway, so I didn't really have anything to compare that to. But I knew that the way I was responding wasn't normal, and so I immediately started getting counseling because I didn't understand why I felt the way I felt. But looking back on it now, I see that part of the reason why intimacy was so intimidating to me was because he was so intimidating to me. But you blame yourself. So I did a whole lot of blaming of myself, which he was really good at blaming me for everything. So at year 13, which was about 2000, I was miraculously healed. Holy Spirit, warm oil, the whole 9 yards. It was the most amazing little tiny taste of heaven. And it's nothing I can even explain, but I know that it was very real. And because I felt it, but also because it completely changed my whole outlook and responses to intimacy. And so it's like a gift that God gave us. And I was so full of hope. I just thought, wow, that's got to be it because he's telling me that's it. Rusty's constantly telling me that's the reason why we're having so many problems. And so I was very, very hopeful at that point because now that big, huge, gigantic, horrible problem was taken care of. And it wasn't but a few weeks that his abuse started again. And he was quite overt, lots and lots of yelling all the time, top of his lungs yelling all the time. And very intimidating. He was kind of a beefy guy. And, he never cussed. He didn't cheat on me. None of the big things, that would maybe be a flag for me. He took us to church every Sunday. He seemed to have a legit relationship with Jesus personally. And but as far as how he was treating me and then eventually our three children, it was anything but. But I spent another whole decade kind of blaming myself and trying to make myself better and just trying to fix it. You know, you all know we're trying to fix it. And finally, about year 22, that's about 10 years ago, I just physically and emotionally and psychologically just couldn't take it anymore. But my youngest was not old enough to, drive and take care of himself yet. So I just wasn't quite sure what to do. So I did finally start moving into another room and he was trying every trick in the book, some love bombing, but mostly just guilting and intimidating like he normally does. And I did that for several years, in and out, because I did not understand that forgiveness is not the same as fellowship. And I thought that if you forgave, you were required to resume fellowship, i.e., sex, which is really, what they're basically going for. And when I learned that, that was a huge, huge turning point for me, that I could forgive, because my heart that loves Jesus, wants to forgive, but it always meant fellowship, and I didn't want to have fellowship with him. So it was really a dichotomy. Lots of cognitive dissonance in the relationship, because he was saying I love you, but he was acting anything but. I'm a Christian. We're all going to church every Sunday. He's doing Bible studies in our home. I'm sorry, he's doing family devotions in our home every week. And yet he was treating us with none of the 9 fruits of the Spirit. And so all of this just took a long time. I brought a lot of fear into my relationship, and God healed me of that fear. And I will just tell you that it was 2 Timothy 1:7, saying that over and over and over in the mirror 50 times a day. And one day I just stood up to him, and I just was not afraid anymore. I don't know if there's a formula there, but it worked for me. So once the fear was broken, he really had to get creative, because fear was his go-to, and now that one didn't work. And so he threw a lot of new ones out that he hadn't been required to use before, and that really threw me off. And so that brought me more into more of the covert abuse, which was much harder for me to see, because without the yelling, it looked and sounded so much different. So when he would say, "Haven't I changed? I've really changed," I couldn't really deny that he had changed, because the yelling was so much less. But then I started learning about the covert abuse, and I realized the cycle was still there, the covert abuse was still there, and we just weren't accomplishing anything. So, and I was getting stronger and stronger and studying. I've studied abuse for years and years and years. I feel like I have a PhD in it, but you learn something new every day. So about 3 years, maybe 4 years ago, something like that, I actually moved out into my best friend and her husband. I moved out to their house, and then I would just come home during the day, make sure the kids were taken care of, but I would not sleep at the house. And I was sucked back in by Emerson Eggerich's book, Love and Respect, and I went back. And at that point, I was deteriorating pretty badly. And I just remember I was to the point where I was sitting in a counselor's office, and I'm staring at the wall, and I said, "There's nothing of me left. We have become one. We have become him." And the counselor was a kind man, but didn't know what the hell he was doing. So we left there, and that was the last time I ever did couples counseling. We did couples counseling for years and years, and I'm just telling you, it is very destructive, makes things worse, carries things on. I just highly do not recommend it. I continued going to counseling on my own. My husband has always been open to counseling, but it's very easy to be open to counseling. It's not so easy to be open to instruction in counseling. And so he was doing his part, and yet nothing ever really changed with him. So a couple summers ago, there was a straw, and I went and bought a fifth wheel, and I moved it about 7 miles from my home, close to my teaching job, and I moved into the fifth wheel. I just couldn't be there anymore. And I was there for a year. I still was not prepared to divorce, wasn't thinking about it, wasn't even considering it. But I was willing to wait him out. And then after about a year, I realized that waiting him out just wasn't really doing anybody any good. I also was learning a lot about what God really says about divorce and marriage. And I was getting a much healthier view of what that meant and what that should look like, and comparing it to what I have had. And so last summer, I filed for divorce in June. And a lot of stuff happened last summer. Um, but let's just say I was very afraid, for all the same reasons we're all afraid: what people are going to say, I'm going to be all alone, I'm 57, the whole thing, starting life over. Um, what's my family life going to look like? All of those things. But I just knew that it was just time. I had to do it at this point. And so last summer, I graduated with my master's degree in librarianship, and I turned down 2 job offers that were in Dallas because I was just too afraid. I was too afraid to move. I was too afraid to take that giant leap. And so I turned the jobs down. I was literally planning on moving my trailer back to and we have a beautiful home on 6 acres. And I was going to move my trailer back there and just live in the trailer. Um, it's the worst possible thing I could have done, but at the time I just was too overwhelmed. So I turned the jobs down. As soon as I turned the jobs down, I realized that, like, immediately, that was not a good thing. And now I'm like completely jobless. And so I was going to move back home anyway, back to the land. And then I thought, you know what? I have a teaching degree. Just because you're not going to be a librarian this year doesn't mean you can't go teach. You have the ability to support yourself. So I started doing that, and I graduated on August 10th. I got another job offer after school had already started for a librarian position in Dallas. It was kind of a miracle. It's like God was throwing me a Hail Mary. And so I put my fear aside and I decided to grab hold of that lifeline. And I graduated and got the job and moved to Dallas, all in about 10 days. It was really kind of a miracle. And so that's kind of where I am now. I've been on Helena's group for, I think, about a year now. And I've learned so much. I'm just fallen in love with all of you. I see exactly where you are in the journey. It's so, what's the word? It's a journey, and there are different steps, and you can't skip any of the steps. And there were people that had gone before me that helped me when I was in those really rough steps, where I was ugly crying every day and just really thinking I was going to die. At times wishing I was dead. And those women have upheld me, and I want to do the same for you. So I hope that is a good enough intro, and I'm here for you in any way that I can be. God bless you all.